you're going to want a thin kind of small brush here, like maybe one of these sizes. Excellent. Get your little guy nice and wet. Okay? Since this is the first time we're using paint, we're going to have to spend a little more time in the water cup. Think of it as soaking, like your paintbrush is taking a bath almost. You know how you get like those little wrinkly fingers and toes? We're going to do that for our paintbrush here. All right, just tap off the extra water. You don't have to worry about squeezing it. Just tap it. And then grab lots of yellow or whatever you decided for your sand. Beautiful. Yep, mine's like a really light yellow. So yeah, it doesn't have to be the same yellow as me. So that's perfect. Maybe sing happy birthday a few times to yourself until that color starts appearing on your brush. You see how it's starting to turn yellow? That's when you know you have enough paint. There we go. After picking up lots of paint on your skinny brush, use that skinny brush to outline your sand. We're going to do a secret drag and pull technique using lots of paint for our line and a controlled wash for the inside of our shape. Remember, this part of your project, you don't need a lot of water. We're working with a lot of paint. We call this technique the dry on dry technique. All right, we're switching over to our flat. We want to get our flat damp, but we don't want any paint this time. We're going to squeeze out our extra water. Think of it as getting out of the shower and you're getting rid of the extra water in your hair, but your hair's still damp afterwards. We're going to do that to our brush. When you're ready, line your bristles up against the yellow line that you put on your paper and thin out that thick line of paint. Spread it across your hill of sand. Might have to revisit your water cup. If you do, just have the tips of your bristles kissing the top of the surface of your cup. Just a little bit of water. You don't need a lot. And while you're doing this, think of what is your next color that you want to use that's similar to yellow. Like intensity, like is it pink? Is it, we want to go from lightest color first down to using our darkest color last, so it doesn't mess up our water cup too badly. So just think, what type of color do you want to use next that's kind of light like yellow? If you want to add shadows to your sand, feel free to add an additional layer of yellow in your shadow area. Your art, your choice though. You don't have to if you don't want to. I'm actually going to add just a little blip of brown to help that shadow stand out. I'm thinking orange is going to be my next color. Do the same thing that you did with your sand to whatever color or whatever thing that you want to do next. You're going to do that outline. Since this little dude is so much smaller than my sand, I'm actually going to do my spread or my drag and pull technique with a small flat. This all depends on what you're coloring in at this time. And we're just going to literally repeat this drag and pull technique with our other items. And when stuff dries, you can add an additional layer of watercolor on the shadowy areas to help make it pop. So this is how I'm going to do my ray. I'm going to do the drag and pull technique with my ray. I'm using blue. For the outline of the ray, I am using a really strong paint with very little water in it. And for the inside of the ray or the manta ray, I am kind of thinning out that strong line by using a controlled wash. I'm using a damp brush to kind of spread that paint back and forth, but I'm not adding paint to my brush when I'm doing this. But I do want this to get darker. So in order for me to make the top of my manta ray a little bit darker, I'm going to add a few dots of additional watercolor on top here. And then I'm going to spread it out using my flat. So that way we get a contrast between the top of the body and the bottom of the body. Now, if you ever come in a bind where you feel or you think that you're using way too much water for your manta ray, you can easily scoop up that extra blue water and redistribute that paint into other areas of the body. Or you can simply pick up the extra paint using a clean tissue as well. Remember, dab, don't rub if you decide to go through with the tissue route. So for all the items on your seabed, you could do this really cool drag and pull technique that you did with your manta ray. You could do with the items on your seafloor, like use lots of paint, very little water to outline each plant in whatever color you choose, and then take a clean, small, flat brush and kind of drag that color in. Now you might need to add an additional layer of color around the edges to kind of emphasize that there's a shadow there. You can always feather it out and lighten up that area and smooth out the rough edges with a damp brush with very little water on it. This is perfect for building shadow, for giving kind of a glowy effect or a glowing effect for your sea life objects. You can also do this with the rocks, and then when your wash or your thin layer of water that you use to spread the color into your object, once that dries, you can add an additional layer for rock texture or sediments that are inside the arch within your rock. Totally up to you, your art, your choice. Just a really cool idea that you can apply to your artwork if you're interested in doing so. Another idea that you could apply to your artwork instead is do your entire sea floor in sort of an oil color format or an oil pastel rather, and then you could use oil pastel blending skills. Like for your sand, you would have yellow as your base color and dots of brown for your shadow, and then you'd go over those dots of brown with the yellow color again, and it will create like a kind of like a tan shadow along your seafloor. You could do this with other colors too. Now for this rock here, I used a really strong layer of brown paint on the outside. I used a clean, flat, damp brush to drag some of that brown in to get that tan base color. And these rock shadows or textures that you see that are applied to the surface of the rock, I used a really heavy like a paintbrush that had a lot of heavy brown in it to kind of sketch those pieces in there. Or the shadow on the sand, I used the leftover paint on my brush to create little streaks of brown, and then I switched back over to my clean flat to kind of, feather out those streaks and make it look more of like a shadow than an actual outline. Notice how I'm dabbing little bits of more brown just underneath my objects to kind of give them sort of like a core shadow against the base of the plant. You should also take note in the fact that my brush is moving in the same direction as I'm blending these colors out. It is going in a right hand side diagonal hatch. The secret dragon pull technique that we were using for the seafloor can also be used for your pillar as well. You can use a really dry brush with lots of paint on it, just a little dot of water, and then you can outline your pillar and then drag that bold outline into the body of your pillar using a damp, clean flat. Now, if you run out of paint, you can always take your outlining brush, dab a little bit more of brown throughout the body of your pillar, and then spread it that way too. Totally up to you. The main goal here is to get the base color of your pillar down, and once it dries, to add another layer of paint on the areas that require darker shadow or more contrast. This will make the swirl in the designs and the divots within your pillar stand out more. But remember, only make these things start to stand out once your bottom layer of paint is dry. Don't try to do all this when the first layer is still wet. If you aren't satisfied with the intensity or the strength of your shadow, you can always go back and add a little bit more brown once your second layer dries, kind of like what I'm doing here. If you ever come across a point where you feel like your line is too abrupt or randomly too dark too quickly, you can easily feather it out like so. Just use that damp flat to feather it out to get it to match the rest of your pillar. Or